Hey everyone, it is Tuesday, Halloween. My guest is Kevin Coons. You're going to love what he has to say. Let's go.
Life, lessons, logistics. Let's go.
Hello everyone. Again, it is Tuesday the 31st. Happy Halloween to everyone out there. I have a great guest today, Kevin Coons from Green Screens AI. We're going to bring him in a moment. I met Kevin at the last Broker Carrier Summit in Tampa. We had a blast. He is highly knowledgeable. He has a lot to say. So let's bring him in. Kevin, how you doing, buddy?
Jeff, it's good to see you, man. How you
Same
been?
here. Same here. Absolutely. I appreciate you joining the show. I know you've been traveling much and that you're a tired soul, but that's good. It comes with territory and logistics, right?
It definitely does. It definitely does. I have to say, though, I like seeing that Broker Carrier Summit in Kansas City, where I'm based, because that means no travel. Which would be great. So,
yeah. Can you walk there?
Potentially. I could probably not walk. It's like 10 minutes from here, though. It's not very far.
Maybe that's good.
Yeah. I could Uber, and I don't have to go to the airport. So that's a bonus. So
that's hilarious. So for those who don't know who Kevin is, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I've been in the industry in freight and logistics for about 12 years, 13 years now. I actually got my start at Carrier Direct, which is now Metaphora, which a lot of people are probably familiar with, a consulting company that works with, carriers, brokers, 3PLs, different people in the industry. They do a lot of tech work now. It's a very different company than when I worked there 13 years ago. Got my start there and then moved out of there into the day-to-day world for a little bit. A company called X Freight down in Florida. I was a freight forwarder that also did brokerage, truckload, LTL. So I had a team of brokers there for a couple of years. And then I got out into the tech industry about 7 years ago. So I joined Revenova TMS when they were first getting started, first getting off the ground, and was there for about 4.5, 5 years, and then came to Green Screens about 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years ago, actually, in 2 weeks, which is crazy to think about because that flew by fast. So,
wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Tell everybody a little bit about Green Screens and what they do.
Yeah, so with Green Screens, essentially what we're doing is we're bringing in data and analytics from our customers. So primarily our customers today are brokers and 3PLs. They are feeding us their truckload data. So as they are brokering loads, as they're covering loads, they're feeding us on each individual load. We actually bring in 36 data characteristics. So anything from, the 5-digit zip, the 3-digit zip, the city-state pair, to the commodity, the pickup and delivery times, all the different pieces that go into a shipment. And then obviously they're feeding us all the costing data of what they costed it for, what they sold it for. And then we have an AI algorithm that we are feeding that data to. So we have a machine learning driven unassisted AI that we are training with all of that truckload data. And then it is actually predicting truckload pricing. So dry van, reefer, flatbed, we're actually predicting prices on the fly. So the idea is to get more real time.
That's awesome. So this is all real-time information that's getting poured into your system that you're turning and burning and then providing that information, whomever is looking for specifics on that data?
Yeah. So it's fed directly from the TMS, which is actually a good question. It's an important piece of the puzzle. So most of our customers, I'd probably say like 70 to 80% of them now, we are actually directly integrated at their TMS. So when they book a load, we see it when they book it, and they fire us off those load characteristics. It can feed the model. We retrain the model constantly. And so the AI is making all the adjustments itself to what the market is doing, what people are paying for loads from location to location. But it's also not just payment of loads. We're also feeding a lot of other market related data. So capacity information, We have a lot of partnerships with other tech providers that are feeding us different data around, the market conditions. We bring in fuel data, other things like that. So those are also part of the models. So it's learning not only for the market, it's also learning for what the brokers are actually doing at any given time. And then it's making those predictions of, you want Chicago to Dallas, and here's the price that it's predicting.
So it's fully customizable.
It is, yeah. So customizable, I would. That's not a great word in software. I'd say it's configurable. It's configurable. Customizable is a big Pandora's box in software. It's configurable, yeah. So for each customer that feeds us, so we have two different models that we run. We have what we call a network model. The network model is standard. It doesn't ever get adjusted. It never gets changed. It's just predicting off of general market conditions, right? Kind of what the market is doing. It gives you a high and a low and a range. And then for each customer, we do have a model that we configure for them. So it's their data, their load characteristics. It's going to use all the other data that we're feeding to the AI, but it's just going to bias. It's going to lean more heavily on what that broker, that 3PL is doing in the market. The example I always use is like, you could be shipping from Chicago to Dallas. The next guy could be shipping from Chicago to Dallas. Same area, same location, but they're shipping TVs for Samsung and you're shipping scrap metal.
Right.
It's two different loads, right? So it's like those, you have to understand your own buying power. You have to understand the carriers that you use in those lanes, what you would be paying to those carriers for the freight that you're moving. And those are the things that we're trying to capture amongst those market dynamics in there. So
does this, does it have the ability to throw out the abnormalities? I mean, because in everything that you do, there's some type of abnormalities that really kind of skew the information that's being fed, because the old term, garbage in, garbage out, right? Does it do that when it does its calculation? Does it look for the abnormalities by lane, by geographical area, so forth and so on?
Yeah. So that's kind of how we construct the models to begin with, right? Is
Cool.
We're going to filter the data that's coming in. So you think about it, same context that I just used, right? An outlier for you might not be an outlier for the next guy, because you have different shipments and different characteristics and requirements that go into that. So your model might, be able to use a load that is quote unquote too high for somebody else, right? In the model, to learn to price off of, whereas the next person's model kicks that out because it's an outlier for them. It never makes sense. It doesn't fit their characteristics. And so everything that comes into the system, we are throwing through the filters, both for each customer and for that network. And then it's cleaning that data, cleansing that data. And those could change, right? We don't go back and like change those filters, but it's adjusting, based on, let's just use price because it's the easy example. What are outliers one day may not be outliers the next day, right? So with the machine learning and the AI, it's moving with the market as it's making those adjustments. And then it's learning from that and making better predictions as we go forward. So all those variables, all those different data points I was mentioning on each load from the market, whatever, could affect that prediction in a different way as it learns, as things change in the market.
Wow. That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that, because I always wanted to find out what Green Screen's AI was all about. And I think that on a 10,000 foot view, you gave me an idea. So I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah.
So we're here to talk about a very important subject. Both you and I were at the most recent Broker Carrier Summit in Tampa, which was fantastic. I think you'll agree with me on that. But there's still that disconnect that everybody's talking about, that they're out here, but they're trying to bring it here to collaborate more, to get a better understanding on how each side works. And of course, data information kind of brings the two together to give them a better understanding as to what's expected on each side, what the market's bringing, all that. That's why I asked you about Green Screen's AI. And the thing is that what do you think is the biggest disconnect that both carriers, brokers are feeling towards each other? And of course, that's affecting the shipper, right? I mean, because they're the ones that start the shipment movement, right? And it's all about information sharing. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the summit was really great for that exact reason, because I think we got to get, people, some of the sessions we just had people in a room having conversations about what's coming from the broker's perspective, what's coming from the carrier's perspective in terms of quote unquote what's wrong, right, with the transaction, with the market, with their relationship, that sort of thing. And I think one of the things that we found interesting was like there was tons of common ground. They just weren't having the conversation, right? Everything has become so transactional in nature in the way that they were moving the freight with one another, and I think that's a byproduct of the market moving faster, right? Information slipping through the cracks, right? And the advent of load boards a few years, several years ago, and it all becoming digitized and going online without probably the proper checks and balances in place to prevent fraud, to prevent double brokering, that sort of stuff. And so I think the facilitation of that conversation at the broker carrier, I think opened a lot of people's eyes to like, well, yeah, you guys do care about the same things I care about. We just need to talk better. We need to build better relationships directly between one another, so that we're not just going out to the load board, right? So we have available capacity if you're a broker, or the carrier has available relationships, right, with brokers or 3PLs, that they can just go in and have the conversation. I've got this load. These are the requirements. This is what's going on. Let's just be honest with each other. You're not going to be perfect for every single load that I have for you. And so take the ones I got that you want. And then, I have my other relationships for these other things. So I think that was the biggest takeaway from that, is like, there's just a lot of miscommunication in that. I think some of the digitization of freight has kind of almost, hindered that in a way, because there just hasn't been good data exchange between people. It's actually made it almost worse, because the integrations, the communications have not been there. I think we're getting better, though. I think one thing we found with some of the tech vendors that were there, and that some of these shows, these conferences we've been at the last several weeks, it's, people are trying to solve that problem, where it's, don't just keep going to the load board and posting and praying, but start building your relationships with your carriers and using those people, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. But you know what? I think one of the biggest disconnects, and it's a real shame, and I think, well, I shouldn't say I know that the industry feels the effects from it, is from both sides, the unethical part of it. The unethical part of doing business, what they say, how they do it, when they do it, and why, affects greatly, the shipper. And it just gives the industry a really bad name. It's those unethical brokers, unethical carriers that say what they do, but don't do what they say. And they don't share that critical information. And that's where the bickering starts. You said, I said, they said, and it's not that flow of commonality of what's expected. And again, it all starts from the shipper. And it starts with the broker asking the shipper about that shipment. And it's up to the shipper to tell them everything that has to deal with the shipment, their hours of operation, the do's and don'ts. And hopefully that broker will take it and give that and share exactly what the shipper said to the carrier. But that doesn't happen all the time, because some carriers, oh, it's a drop and hook, oh, it's this, oh, it's that. So the brokers don't give them that information. They go, they pick it up, and it's a huge surprise. It's that lack of information. And I think what happened during the summit that we both attended is that everybody was on the outside. They were afraid to mingle. When I walked in there on the reception night, people were kind of like distant, and all of a sudden the atmosphere of the room started changing, and people started bouncing from one person to the other person. They started feeling relaxed. People started opening up. They started chatting, saying what they thought they would never hear, if that makes any sense, right? Do you agree with that? I thought it was very unusual, because usually they don't want to share that information, and they want to say, stay on the left side of the room, and the carriers want to stay on the right side of the room, and they don't find that medium of happiness.
That's why I told a lot of people, like, I think this was one of the most interesting and maybe impactful conferences I've been to, Not for us specifically in terms of like we got some good leads for green screens. We talked to a lot of people, right? And some of our customers, like Dan from Linkage and Troy from Leonard's, like they're already our customers, right?
Right.
At green screens, they use green screens today. But I think the most interesting thing and the impactfulness of it that I mean is more so like engaging in that conversation. Like you said, it wasn't as genuine, like it was more genuine for them to be there in the same room when they started feeling comfortable, when they understood kind of what the point was of having these conversations and getting this stuff out in the open and in the air. It really facilitated some really good conversations between people about, how to work together better, that sort of thing. I think it built some good relationships between some brokers and carriers that are going to walk away and call those people up. Be like, yeah, I got plenty of loads from Nashville or wherever, right, that I can bring to you guys. So I think that was a good, that's why I thought it was a really, really good use of time at a conference to have these types of relationship building things between the brokers and carriers. And we talked about a lot of different topics too. I thought some of the technology topics that we got to speak about, some of the market related topics that we got to speak about were really important to drive some of those conversations, because like you said, it's not just this, there's always going to be bad actors in all different industries, but it's like, guys, let's not all engage in this race to the bottom, commoditize everything, right? Everything becomes about a rate, do it cheaper. It's like, it was like, let's make sure the freight moves effectively at the right rate, and the right situation with the right, like you said, details and data, so that the customer is happy at the end of the day. They're willing to pay a little more if you just service the customer. Right?
Of course, it's service before profits, but a lot of people don't realize that, and they kind of, reverse that. Oh, the profits, we got to stay alive. Do whatever we have to do to get that load in the house, and pretty much screw it. But that's not the right way to do it in this market, for sure. You got to service them and don't worry about those profits, because if you do things right, those profits are eventually going to catch up with the service, and you're going to be in a very good position. And so were they, because they knew that you were there in tough times and helped them to get through that, and that you were willing to eat a little bit in order to help them do that. But one of the biggest things I thought was the breakout sessions. And with the breakout sessions, amongst other things, when you go to conferences, Kevin, and you hear the speakers just pretty much dictating and saying what they have to say, and then everybody claps and leaves the room and goes to another one.
I don't know. That never happens. I don't know.
You know what? But what's unique about this one is that every speaker that went up there had an actionable question that they asked the people who were in attendance wanting to listen to them. And that got the engagement going. I don't really see that at events. I haven't gone to a lot, but in the past when I did, I never saw that real true engagement where they asked them a question and they were put into a position to answer it. And next thing you know, the left side of the room is saying something, the right side doesn't agree with it, and then the right side starts saying stuff. And now they're working it out live while you're there in that room with 30, 40, 50 people interacting and exchanging solutions and recommendations and listening rather than talking. I mean, that was like the biggest takeaway for me, because it's just unusual in that type of environment. People are usually like, and they don't want to say anything because they're afraid to. But these guys at this event, they were talking.
Yeah, people were really engaged. And that's why I would say, for the next one in the spring in Kansas City, listen, I've been to every conference in the industry at this point, I think, honestly. I've been to 16 TIA events over the years between Technovations and Capital Ideas. I've been to multiple FreightWaves events. I've been to CSCMP. I've been to IANA. I've been to TCA. I've been to pretty much all of them. Manifest. You could name it. I've probably been to the conference. And I would highly recommend, if you're a broker or a carrier and you're thinking about, what should I go to? What would I gain? At least some educational advantage, right? Some better understanding of my relationships with my carriers, the market, what have you. Engage in useful conversations. You should go to the broker carrier summit, because it was from that angle. And I'm not taking anything away from the TIA. Like I said, I've been to 16 TIA events, been to multiple Freight Waves events. It's just a different event, right? It's definitely was for me personally, in being to so many of these different events over the years, it was really awesome to see what you just said, right? More engagement, more. So I did a panel on tech and just talking about through changes and what people should be paying attention to, what they should be adopting and that sort of stuff. And the first day we were more panel driven, and we started asking some questions, and it really just started the conversation. It wasn't intentional the way that we had it laid out. And so then when we finished, we did both the panels both days, right? Because we swapped and did one each day, but swapped the groups. And the next day, when we walked out, we were like, hey, let's just tomorrow, let's just open it up. Let's try to get people talking about their technology, and what they're seeing, and then give them feedback on it. And it did happen. And it was awesome. It was really cool. Like it was fun to hear, their feedback. I think we had some eye-opening moments where people were like, I don't have a lot of tech, but I have all these issues. And there's this funny story with this guy who does all these hot shots. And he's like, I have no TMS. I have and I'm like, how many, I'm thinking he has like 10 trucks, right? And I'm like, how many trucks do you have? He's like, I have 150. I'm like, man, you got to get on a TMS and you got to get integrated with people. Like some of the problems that you're having are directly related to the data that you aren't collecting, right? And the game of telephone that's happening, right? Trying to gather your data and pass it on to different people. And so he and I gave him a bunch of recommendations, and he's like, going to go do demos with these people here. And we talked afterwards about it. He's like, you're right. Cause it's like, I don't want to work with some of these brokers. I don't want to work with some of these people, but I think if I had a better system to be able to transact that data, it would be better. Right. Yeah.
That's like the question that comes from that comment is, why don't you want to work with them? Again, that opens up another segment for them just spewing, because it's an actionable question that needs to be answered. It's like, well, why don't you? What did they do that you didn't like? And then that starts another conversation. It's great. I mean, because when I walked out of those rooms, Kevin, the first thing I went was like, wow, just like, wow, did that really just happen? I mean, you just don't see that happening at events. I'm sorry, the ones that I've been to, like I said, were more instructional, if that makes any sense. Like IANA and TIA and all those other ones that I used to go to years ago, they were more instructional. But now it's really starting to open up, and especially, when I was presenting, I came from the shipper side. Because when I was on that side and you get all those calls every single day, it's annoying. It's so annoying. There's a different process, a different approach for people who have tons of operational responsibility that don't have the time to spend on the phone listening to garbage, because it's the same pitch and everything. But there was one shipper, right? Wasn't there one shipper at the conference or whatever? He learned.
There were maybe a couple, but there was somebody that piped up, and it was actually really good.
It was fantastic. And then next thing you know, brokers and carriers started answering their questions, started standing up, and all this other kind of stuff. So I think that guy had a lot of takeaways as well. But I just like the actionable questions that you asked. Troy asked. I mean, all the presenters, everybody. Ed asked. I mean, there were people just like
that Trey and Kevin Hill session when it got like real serious. Like that was a good one. It was just a lot of back and forth between the brokers and the carriers.
That was a lot of back and forth.
Great.
It was awesome, but everybody started talking to everybody after they left the room.
Yeah. It was, and again,
Yes and go. I'm not talking about
right. It facilitated. You're right too, though. It facilitated the conversations outside the room, right? Because everybody walked out of the room, continuing those conversations in more personal ways, one-on-one, as a broker met a carrier, a carrier met a broker, what have you, that I think led to more substance to the conference as a whole, right? Like people got more out of it as a whole because that started the conversation, then it continued, So yeah, it was it was great. And especially, I mean, I think if you take it back to what you were originally talking about all the fraud and like the bad actors and the issues and the things that are going on out there, it also, and I'll just take the tech tilt here as well, says, I work for a tech company,
Of course.
but we have all this technology. We have these ways to integrate, share data to actually strengthen those relationships. And like you said, to make people more efficient so they can spend time on the phone dealing with exceptions or things like that. And I think that's another piece that was a takeaway in terms of the communication aspect of working directly between the brokers and the carriers, building those relationships and using their own networks with one another. That was really great because they're like, oh, well, if you can just send us the EDI, or you could just do this, or we could just get that, and I don't have to like get on the phone with you, and we don't miss information that comes through about the pickup or the load or the details. Right. That was like a huge eye opener and light bulb where it was like, oh, cool. Yeah, no, hey, when we get back, let's talk and let's see how we can get those connections made and make the relationship easier. And then that naturally just gets rid of the fraud, right? Because the bad actors can't even get involved in the transaction at that point.
Right. And something, it's the way I look at it, Kevin, is that, when you do the transactional type business and you're a transactional type broker, the risks are much higher than a dedicated opportunity because you're switching up carriers. They're not in the same area all the time. So there's risk associated with that. There's loyalty that's associated with that as well, because especially if you're trying to build, a relationship with the carrier and have them as a go-to and put them in your corral, you don't really have that because they're just floating all over the place because it's like the hit or miss, right, on that side. So when you start getting into dedicated, and I always preach this, and I'm preaching it now, I like the control. That control builds long-term business relationships on all sides, the shipper, broker, carrier side, because they're always they're always tied together at some point because it's always constantly moving. And that information has to be shared. I always say, listen, if there's any problem, I better find out before the shipper finds out. Because if it, I have this term and I've used it for decades, Kevin. I don't fire carriers. Carriers fire themselves. Brokers, I don't fire. When I was on the shipper side, they fire themselves because if they say what they're going to do and they don't do what they say, that's not my fault. That's on you. So you're gone. I don't have time for this kind of stuff, because when it gets to really complex and we're talking about, integration and the tools that you need to support the data, that all comes into play. And if you're not on top of your game and you're not providing the service that I got you hired for, you're out. I don't have time for that because there's too many different moving pieces, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on something as well, where when I talk to a lot of brokers now, especially in like this down market, right, with the rates being as bottomed out as they have, and actually I was just looking at volume data today in our own data. Greenspace now has $21 billion worth of truckload data that hits our engines. We see all of it. Right. Volumes actually came down last week, which is not good in peak season, right? Like it's not a positive sign. But we saw some volume dip last week and the rates have stayed down. Obviously they're at the bottom, but in that kind of an environment, the only thing that you could do is build better relationships, get new shippers, right? And to do these things and to acquire new freight to come in to keep yourself afloat, because it won't last forever. The pendulum will swing. It's got to come back.
It seems
to stay afloat. Yeah, we hope so. My thing I keep saying is if it doesn't, we're in much bigger trouble.
Oh
yeah. There's much bigger problems economically then. But it's the whole aspect of that relationship, right? Like you said, and I always tell brokers, like, you need to be diversified. Don't just do spot transactional truckload. Like, try to get some more dedicated business, get some more committed volumes from certain shippers, even if it's not super large shippers. If you get some consistent lanes every week from somebody that's a smaller or medium-sized shipper, then you can start using those same carriers over and over again. And then when you have that transactional freight, those people might have extra trucks, or you got backhaul opportunities for people, right? Or you got other things going on where you have a carrier network, and some of that is built out of that contract network that helps you go out and acquire new business as a broker or a 3PL or on the carrier side, right? If you're willing to commit to those relationships on consistent lanes, but you do keep some of your, maybe you have 30 trucks and you keep 10 of those for spot opportunities. That's great, because then when you have those relationships, they're going to come to you with those spot opportunities, and you'll want those trucks in those lanes. And so I think that's also a huge takeaway from a lot of this was like, if you diversify that service offering to your customers, and like you said, it builds trust. You are communicating faster. It's easier. You like the people that you're working with. Surprise, surprise. So then you build those relationships, and then you're willing to, hey, something's going wrong. You're going to be honest about it. There's that trust factor there. Let's get it figured out, right? This isn't a one and done. You're fired. You suck. You're the worst because, your turbo blew out or something, right? It's like, come on, like things happen. And so I think when you have that trust factor and you build those relationships and you're using those repeat relationships back and forth between the different, whether it's dedicated or transactional, I think it's just easier to communicate that way. Yeah. Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it comes with the territory. The more complex the operation and the higher the transportation spend, let's just say $100 million a year. These logistics guys, traffic managers, supply chain managers, they're like rocket scientists. They really are. They know the industry like the back of their hand and then some. These guys will dive into power units and find out when was the last time a turbo blew. And they find out that the turbo blew 2 weeks ago. So why did it blow again? Somebody
again. Exactly.
Someone's BS. Yep. But when you've got fleet and you're moving that material, they're going to dive in. They know how to do it quickly. They know which lane that power unit was on. They're going to pull up the PMs on it. They're going to drill into it, and they're going to call you out. So it's not advantageous for you to bullshit and say something that you really shouldn't, just to go into CYI or CYA, when you're going to get caught with your pants down around your ankle, and it's just you're not losing a load, and say it's a $6,000 load. You could be losing multi-million dollars worth of business for trying to cover your ass, and that's what I try to relate to a lot of people out there. It's better to be honest and have the integrity and tell someone something they don't want to hear rather than BSing them. Seriously, you can't do it not in this market. I'll tell you that. Right
no, now. Especially not in. That's what I was gonna say. Especially in this market, it's like man, you've taken me back. You're giving me PTSD from broken freight. I'm like, that's what I used to always tell people though. I had like 7 brokers that worked for me, 8 brokers, and I was like, just be honest. And we did everything, right? We did ocean, air, so there's a lot of shit that went wrong with that stuff too. I'm like, there's nothing, you can't control everything. So just be honest, right? Let them know what went wrong, how it happened, where it happened. And as long as, and also, I mean, as long as you're doing your due diligence, as long as you are honest with yourself too, you're not using just a junk carrier that you just randomly found just so you could win a load or whatever, right? You're being smart about how you're managing your own business, or vice versa, right? The carrier is not just trying to take loads from anybody who might be double brokering stuff or whatever. As long as you're honest about your own business and you're careful and in compliance and all that sort of stuff, if shit happens, just be honest about it. And I think that goes for like every part of the transaction. Like we think about things in a certain way with green screens where it's like there's all these layers of the transaction, right? From pricing to negotiation with the carrier to going back and winning tenders from shippers, all the different things. In all those pieces, like you talk about rates or you talk about different things, just be honest. If you can't move it for that price, if you don't think you're going to be able to get a carrier because it's, whatever the freight is or whatever the lane is or whatever the situation is in the market, just be honest about it. Don't just blow smoke up their ass like you're going to be able to move it. Like I think that's the biggest fallacy amongst people. It's like, well, just go get the freight. We'll figure it out. No, don't do that.
No. And it's ridiculous. Like I give them the lien And I mean, this is a big disconnect. And they go, well, how much do you want for it? I was like, well, how much can you do it for? You know, it's your business. You know your business.
It's your truck. It's your, you know what your costs are.
I'm not going
Right.
to dictate the rate. If you're following the market, you know what a good market rate is, and this is what you need to support your business. Let me know what it is. And lo and behold, and that's why we talk about disconnects between brokers and carriers and shippers. You come back later on because you got a better rate, and you tell them, you know, hey Jim, listen, I'm real sorry. I appreciate you putting in the quote for the RFP, but you didn't, you didn't win the lane. Well, why not? Well, your rate wasn't where. Well, you know what? I could have gone a little deeper. And I'm like, dude, you had the opportunity to give me your best rate. I asked you for that.
It was
But those are the rate that you
RFP.
said that you can do for in order to support your driver, the maintenance, everything else, fuel, everything that's associated with that move. And now you tell me you can do it for cheaper. If you could have done it for cheaper, you would have, and you really wanted that lane because it fit in your wheelhouse, you would have done better and still be able to run it profitably. That's not my fault. And that's what it's a big disconnect with them when they try to say they're going to do something or they back out. You know, listen, I'm not a big broker, but do millions and stuff like that. And the thing is that carriers don't realize that when they screw a broker, all right, I'm talking for all brokers out there, they're not just losing the load and let it be $2,000, $4,000, $6,000. They're losing any additional opportunities that fall into that broker's lap. And it could be millions, and they don't think about it. You know, they cut their nose off to spite their face, and it's detrimental to their full operation out there because you don't say you could do it for $2,000 and somebody else offers you $2,400 and they jump from it at the last second when they're supposed to pick it up. You're done. I'll never do business with you. And I've been doing that for decades. And I tell them straight up, you know, don't screw me because you're not screwing yourself out of $6,000. You're screwing yourself out of several $1 million worth of business. You know?
Yeah, I think it happens that happens on all sides of the transaction, right? The cargo owner, the broker, the carrier, everybody, you know, greed corrupts absolutely, right? And like people, like you said, they instead of taking the long game to win extra, you know, additional loads, additional freight, that sort of thing, you know, you don't want a 50 or 60% margin rev on a shipment, one shipment, because at the end of the day, the market's going to dictate itself, and then somebody's going to figure you out, and when they do, you're done. You're not. That trust is broken, yeah, and you're not going to get more freight. There's no way to get back in there, right? If you do that 20 times, 30 times, depending on where you operate, what customers you have, what space you're in, there's not going to be a lot of opportunities for you, right?
It's a vicious circle.
So,
for God's sakes. The thing is that if you can't do it, don't fake it to make it and take it on. Tell them straight out. You know what? This lane doesn't fit my wheelhouse. I'm not going to be able to support it. So therefore, I'm going to back out. And that's as a broker to a shipper, right? And then the carrier. Yeah, you know, I really looked at it, you know, yeah, I can do it. And then they come back like a week later, you know what, my ROI is off the chain. I can't support this anymore. Do it up front before you dive in and say you're going to do something.
Right. Because things change within your business and your cost structures and that sort of. So yeah, just be honest about it.
That's the whole.
Right.
But the problem is there's a lot of people out there on all sides that can't grow a set. I'm serious. It's enabled. It's because they show themselves as weak. Dude, come on. You know, I don't care, women, a man. Just please be honest with all sides when you do business with them. You're going to come out on the good side, and you're going to make a lot because you're going to be considered a trusted soul. And that's what you need to be in this business, especially now. Don't try to do something that you're incapable of doing to try to win the business and you fail miserably. You'll never get that customer back again.
Well, it's interesting too. So before I got in the freight industry, I kind of worked on the shipper side as well. So I think we talked about this in Broker Care because I lived in China for a while and did some projects. Like we had our own company and we were bringing stuff in from overseas, like energy efficiency stuff. And we were representing companies in Israel and the US as their distributor. So we had to work on a lot of our own freight, but we weren't moving a lot of stuff, like huge volumes.
Right.
But our Chinese partner was a big commodity trader. So we were helping him with some projects that he was doing, some agricultural goods, some different things, that sort of stuff. And you mentioned before about the shippers being, very, very tuned into what that cost factor is of moving that at whatever they need it for to make money, right? Because, and that was the thing I think I learned on the shipper side. It was like, it's not like I was always just looking for the lowest price, but if it had to be a price that, like, if they're going to move a bunch of grain or they're going to move a bunch of corn or something, like, then it had to be the right price to be able to make money off of it. Otherwise we're not moving it. And I think that was the central thing that I learned. It's like the shippers, now I'm not saying that for every shipper. Some shippers are just cost. All they want is the lowest cost, which isn't good either. That shouldn't be the way it works.
Nope.
But because they're going to get burned as well. They're going to run out of good providers.
The SG&A costs are going to rise because there's no loyalty, and they're going to spend a tremendous amount of time redoing RFPs constantly all the time because they're just diving to the bottom, and there's a cost associated.
Penny wise, pound foolish, right?
Right. And the thing is that they think they're creating more, or let's say creating more cost to the bottom line as far as savings is concerned on the front side. The back side, it's not going to happen, and I proved it because they're going to be reinventing the wheel constantly
every time. Right. They're
going to have to go and hunt for their on the procurement side to get carriers that are willing to jump in their corral with them and do business with them. And there's a cost associated with that. I don't care who you are out there.
It'd be an interesting study.
You don't go to the high. You take that medium where everybody makes a coin. We're all in this business to make money, and once they realize that and the costs associated in doing business, because sometimes they fail to recognize that. They really do. And I'm talking about the shipper.
And that's it. The shipper, it's cost of doing business. Like, I'm not selling freight. As a shipper, you are moving goods. All you're trying to get is money from your goods from point A to point B because you have a buyer of your goods, right? Of your cargo, whatever it is that you're selling, your product, your widget, if you're moving corn, whatever it is, you just got to get it to the person delivered safely and in compliance and all that, so that they receive the goods and they pay you for the goods. And I think that's maybe we need more shippers at the broker carrier. So we probably need to get more of them out there for that side of the equation, right?
But the only problem with that, Kevin, is, man, are they going to get pounded by carriers and brokers?
That's the problem. I know. That's why they don't like coming to these events, because then it's sharks in the water.
The waiver. Leave the shippers alone.
It's sharks in the water at that point, man. Yeah, it is. It's so true. But I think it's an interesting, like, there's that dichotomy or trichotomy, I guess, between brokers, carriers, and shippers, where it's like that communication needs to be had about how that process is going to work and that sort of thing. When you were just saying that, though, about the cost for the shipper on the backside, about, if you're constantly burning carriers, if you're constantly burning brokers and you're redoing the RFPs and you're doing this stuff, I'd be interested. It'd be an interesting study to see, like, the exceptions that occur for shippers, right? All the problems that they have. I would venture to guess, I would theorize that the ones that are constantly doing that, trying to drive to the bottom price, trying to do that, are the ones that are getting burned the most. Like, they're the ones that have the most problems, the most shipment issues, the most delivery issues for their customers, because they're not playing the game fairly either, right? They're not being a partner in the transaction. They're actually just trying to get the lowest cost. And so, yeah, I mean, these are, it's funny because these are a lot of the takeaways we had at the conference of it's like, man, you guys got to communicate.
And I know it as a fact. This isn't just like an idea that it may happen. It definitely happens when you start looking at all the moving pieces, the size of the opportunity, how complex the logistics operations is, and all the touch points. If you have to reinvent the wheel on every single part of that internal operation, it's going to cost you a shitload of money, you know?
Oh,
And
yeah.
then when you
Yeah.
get into a bind, and I'm telling you right now, and I preach this to everybody out there, and frankly, I don't care if they listen to me or not, because I know it as a fact, is that when you burn a carrier, especially if you have an incumbent carrier that's been working for you a long time, and you know how they operate and their price point in order to do business, and then you cheapen them and ask them to go to the bottom, and then they're gone. And then when you get into a bind as a shipper and you reach out to them and say, hey, Frank, listen, man, I want to get you back in house. Things are starting to change, all this other kind of stuff. You know what I say to them? Go screw yourself. Where were you when I needed you and you threw me out to the wolves after I'd been with you for 2 or 3 years? The loyalty is gone, Kevin. It's gone. And it's going to cost that shipper more money to replace them than it would have if they just kept them in place and sat them down face to face and negotiated. This is the problem I have. I know you have a problem. How can we come to a happy medium where both sides are equally happy with the takeaways from our conversation? That's what needs to happen. But yet they don't understand that. They do not.
Well, that kind of, it's funny too, because like that goes back to exactly what you just said. It goes back to what I was talking about with like the guy with the 150 trucks and no TMS, right?
I don't know how
it's like you gotta, right, and you have to, like, the data that it's not just about transacting loads, it's also about the data that you're collecting and like understanding your relationships with your shipper, with your broker, with your carrier on each side, and being able to go back. If you're just going in and saying, well, you had one problem, you're done, when they ran 20 other shipments that were absolutely phenomenal, and like you said, you're just reinventing the wheel at that point because you're one and done, that's just asinine, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. Like it's you should have the data in front of you, and they run 99.99% effective, but you had one issue and you're ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like, what are you doing? And that's where the technology, I think, comes in to that equation with the data and that sort of stuff too. We have so much data out there.
Oh my God.
And it's so easy to collect that and report on it and understand your KPIs and understand what is important to you and understand your cost factors and all that sort of stuff. If you're not doing that, you're crazy. Like that it shouldn't be emotional driven decisions. It should be driven by the market and data.
It's absolutely crazy, Kevin. And the thing is that the best kind of data is their data and how you use it against them. And then you get the perspectives of all the other ones like yourself. And there's a ton of others out there that you can take bits and pieces from and try to create your own perspective on what's happening out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then use your own data against what they're dictating. Because you're going to find an average there. And it's like, where does your data fall in line with the average out there? Am I below that average or am I way high above that? And am I conducting business the way that I should be, especially externally, with all the lanes I have, all the procurement, all the cost structures, everything like that? I mean, a really good traffic manager, logistics manager is going to do that. They're constantly digging into that data. And using their data as an outside person, when I was a consultant, I would use their data against them. Absolutely 100%, because they can't deny it. It was purged from their system. Here's the data that you gave. Here's the results from that data. Here's how it matches up with this out here. Here, take a look at it. It's your stuff. It's not.
It's not an argument at that point.
It's not an argument.
Like, this is what it says. Like,
right.
It's just,
so
are you disagreeing with the facts?
Right. You should but you're not. Why?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we just have so many emotionally driven decisions in this industry. And I think a lot of that too, I mean, not to just like, it's there's a reason for it, right? There's a reason for the emotion. There's a reason for the, the excitement that people get riled up with, because we're not talking about, this is also the thing with like digital freight brokers and stuff that are, right. The digital transaction is a good thing in theory, but it's not, we're not picking up an Uber where you're getting one person at one location and taking them to down the street to a bar. You're picking up $1 million worth of goods in a truck. Like that's that's a totally, people lose their jobs over this. They lose their livelihoods, like things in all parts of the supply chain, whether you're moving the goods, whether it's your goods that are getting moved. Like this is a much bigger transaction. It's a much bigger situation. It is kind of weird, right? Because we don't care about our own well-being. We're just going to jump in the car with a stranger as much as we do $1 million worth of goods. That's just economics at the end of the day,
and that's
right?
what the shippers are doing. You think about it when they're always changing up their carriers. That's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
Somebody that they know and how to operate.
Yeah.
Now they're going to the bottom and they're giving their freight to I don't know who this person is, and I'm going to jump in bed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's the issue. But I think that's where the emotion comes into it. And I understand that, right? Because they see something go wrong, whatever. But I think that's where the data, that's where the market understanding, like you said, by using, and it's not just rates and pricing, but it's also the carriers and having the background data on them and the understanding of who they are. Like I think all those things kind of fit together from a data perspective to understand how you should be moving your loads, how you should be transacting, how you should be managing your network. And I think unless you have the systems and the integrations and that stuff in place ahead of time, right? There's no way to manage that. You can't, you're not going to have the information you need to make, rational decisions rather than emotional ones. So, yeah.
Well, you know what? Our time has come to an end. I appreciate your time. I know that you're limited. You've been so busy. You just got back from traveling. So I appreciate you joining the show today, Kevin.
Absolutely, Jeff. It was a great conversation, man. It was different. I'm not just talking AI and technology and machine learning. This is like some real, hard-hitting industry stuff. So
yeah,
I always enjoy that.
We try to keep it
real.
I
like it.
It is what it is. We're not trying to bury somebody's head in the sand or sweep it under the rug. If we can expose it, we expose it. We say what it is, if they like it or not. I wouldn't say it's my job. I'm just trying to give back to those who don't really realize or don't look into different areas that they should look in. And I try to expose that for what it is. And I appreciate your input. As always, we had a great time down in Tampa. I'm sure we're going to have some future good times as well, especially in Kansas City. So I'm looking forward to it, my friend.
Barbecue's on me. All right.
Sounds good, my friend. All right. So if you are interested in looking at the Broker Carrier Summit in Kansas City, you can go to their website, check it out, and register the whole month of November. There is an early bird special, which is at a discounted rate. And myself, the Bodacious Cowboy, is throwing in another promo code, which is Cowboy1, which will give you another 5% off the discounted promotional early bird rate for the month of November. So go check it out. Follow it because it's always changing topics, agenda. It's all going to be great. And we were there. We know it. Don't miss out on it. That's all I can say.
Definitely. We'll see you guys out there if you're out there.
Thank you. Take care now.
All right, Jeff. We'll talk soon, man.
Yes, see ya. Have it. Another logistics life and lesson learned. Until next time.